Welcome back, y'all, to the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Deshotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya-Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey y'all.
We have a pretty exciting list of things to talk about, I guess. Exciting as, could be good or bad, but a lot of stuff happening in Texas over the past week, and we're here to talk about it. And as always, we appreciate our patrons, and this podcast goes out first to you guys, and then we open it up to the greater interwebs. But we really appreciate all the traction we've gotten this week as we've tried to bring more folks in to help support what we do here. So we just want to say thanks again. So I guess we could just start with, which is probably, I think, the biggest news is that our Governor Greg Abbott, removed his mask mandate, but it went official on Wednesday. And so that was the first day that people could go out without a mask. But of course, we saw local officials in Texas across the state, really, especially in the bigger counties and cities, try to continue to enforce that through the health departments. What's been your experience since Wednesday? Have you gone out and noticed anything different in North Texas?
I have not gone out. However, some family members did. They had a big shock when they went to a place that we go to often, Eatsies, and there was this big sign basically saying, America was founded on freedom, so wearing a mask is your choice. And so then they, slowly backed away, thinking, all right, we'll stop frequenting this place. So that was, a big shock. And I think, like most places, people are accumulating lists of where masks are required. And then even then, it is very frightening. I got my hair done on Monday and I was talking with the salon owner, and, he is still planning to continue with masks, but he has clients that, have been texting him saying, hey, I'm really, not going to wear this. And he's sort of trying to figure out, how do I tell them I would really like this? There's also the threat of, a violent retaliation. So this has been, I think, a very nervous time for many people, at least in Dallas. And I'm sure it feels that way pretty much in all parts of the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he's basically throwing businesses under the bus, and even more so, retail workers or the people on the front lines who, it just kind of reminds me of the conversation we had about teachers and guns, and Republicans wanted to put it all on the teachers to be the ones to, like, fight a school shooter off with a gun that they had on them. And I feel like we've almost done the same thing to our everyday retail workers, who we can't even get these people to support a $15 minimum wage, but they're now being forced to enforce the rules, their company, when there are folks out there who are very confused, quite honestly, I think, and probably rightfully so, because the governor is just trying to remove himself from accountability, but at the same time, not making it very clear that, businesses can continue to enforce it. And one of the most ironic examples of this was, I saw on Twitter that the restaurant that Greg Abbott announced removing the mask mandate in Lubbock actually enforces the mask mandate even still to this day. So he might have been there, for this event, but they are continuing to do the exact same thing. And I just feel like it's just so awful that people are being put into this in this situation.
I was actually glad to hear about that restaurant in Lubbock. I've eaten there. It is right before you get to the airport. And it's sort of like your last shot to get real food. And so when he held the press conference there, I was like, oh, that's a shame. And then when they made this other announcement that they were actually continuing to enforce this, I thought that was really good, because that restaurant will get very crowded, and it has really, really good food. And, they do a really good job, sort of in and out if you're just taking.
What kind of restaurant is it?
It's Tex-Mex.
Oh,
And
okay.
I normally don't like Tex-Mex that much. That's probably sacrilegious to say, but they do really, really well. And I've every time I've been there, it's been great. So
Cool. I've only been to Lubbock a few times, the airport. I don't know if I've ever been to that restaurant, but so there was a poll done, and Friends at Progress Texas, I guess, commissioned this poll with PPP, asking specifically about how Texans felt about the mask mandate. And so I just want to share my screen here for a second. And you can kind of see the results of this poll, and it was done. Essentially, the results are displayed by metro area. And not surprising, Austin very strong on supporting masks, and that's my experience living here. Most places, people are wearing their mask, and in fact, like I see people driving their cars around wearing masks in the car by themselves, which I find strange. But I've done that sometimes when I've like gotten in the car and not remembered or not thinking I'm still wearing my mask and I'll just still have it on. But yeah, I mean, I think people in Austin have been really good about it, and our numbers are reflecting that. I think this week would have been South by Southwest, and that's right when we initiated all these protocols last year, like literally almost a year to the day today. Our mayor basically had to make a tough call of canceling South by Southwest, and would seem like an extremely brave thing and like a big deal at the time is almost like, oh wow, can't believe we almost did that. And so, looking around the state, I think the burden is again on local officials, and a little surprised with your friends and your neighbors there in North Texas, Jessica. 48-48. That's it's like a coin flip up there.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. So I do a lot of running and walking in my neighborhood, and I have to say, like Wednesday, the first time I sort of ventured out, every person I encountered, I was like, this is like a one, like a half and half shot. Like, is this person nuts or are they sane? So that is something where that it sort of introduces like a new level of fear anytime you leave the house.
I mean, North Texas, what are you going to do? It's a wild place. We look at it as Democrats as sort of like, besides Houston, but like really sort of the where we can gain the most. And I think that's been evident over the last few cycles. Of course, we picked up different House seats, U.S. Congress and State House, and then Tarrant County finally tipping blue this presidential cycle just by the thinnest of margin. In fact, it was days after the actual election when they were counting the last of the mail-in ballots and things that it finally tipped our favor. But looking at this, you can see how masks have become political, and unfortunately, that's true. But we can see the metro areas, for the most part, oppose the removal of the mask mandate. Now, you could also say, like, well, that's where the densest populations are. That's where we actually need them the most. And in some of the more rural areas of Texas, people may not even see their neighbors that often or go out as much. But it's very clear with these numbers that in the rest of Texas, the mask mandate repeal was very popular. And we see, that's kind of what we thought the reason the governor did it in the first place. He's looking at his poll numbers. He's lost about 10 points over the last few months. From the Republican side, he's lost about 10 points from 88% to 79% in the Texas Tribune poll. And so we weren't really surprised to see these kind of moves, him doing this, and the sort of response from the Republicans. I don't know if you've seen some of the things that, the right-wing Republicans have been doing, but even from Dan Patrick and I want to say your guy up there, Don Huffines, former senator, they were like, well, it's about time. They weren't really thanking him for doing it as much as saying, what took you so long? And so that's really the attitude, and that seems to be the pivot point that he's making, to turn this into a political thing and sort of distract. The other thing that I noticed here in this is on racial lines. So if you look at racial lines, people of color want the mask mandate in place. Latinos 60%, Asians 63%, African Americans 54%, and others 63%, while white Texans support the repeal of the mask mandate 57%. What's going on?
It is very stark when you look at that. And I mean, we know that Black and Hispanic Texans have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. And we remember several months ago in areas like El Paso and Laredo, I mean, they were bringing in refrigerated trucks. They were just, it was so devastating for the hospitals, for the morgues there. And so my heart again goes out to those communities. And a lot of these folks too are also the frontline workers that we, were just discussing, the people that are going to be the most heavily impacted by this. So it does not surprise me that these groups would be, for the most part, opposed to this mandate repeal.
Hmm. And I'm hoping that it'll also boost support for the vaccine. If you got to find the silver lining in all this, and the hope is that we continue to, have a successful rollout of the vaccine across the country. Texas has been lagging behind. Unfortunately, I think last time I saw, but it's been a week, but we were somewhere like 47th out of 50 in the percentage of our population that has been fully vaccinated. I think now we are at a place where we have a lot of mega sites in major urban areas, and so that's been rolling out. And I think we've reduced the age requirement down to 50 now. So we're opening up, the pool of folks who can now get the vaccine, which is great because that means maybe the more vulnerable populations, older populations have now gotten the vaccine. But I just got to go back to this poll one more time because we're looking at the partisanship. And I think it's important to as we talk about the way this has been politicized by the governor, Trump supporters support the repeal of the mandate almost 80%. About 80% of Trump supporters are happy with this decision, whereas almost exact opposite, about 80% of Biden supporters oppose this action. And that party affiliation is right in line with those measures. So isn't super surprising. It looks like, the governor has sort of been looking over his shoulder. And, I think that kind of takes us to our next topic. There's a few people out there who's been making some noise that he might be looking out for. One of them is, of course, Beto O'Rourke, who we released an exclusive op-ed at TexasSignal.com. It first went out, of course, to our patrons, and then the next day we released it for everyone. This is certainly something we want everybody to see. Did you get a chance to read it?
Yes, and I had a bunch of people texting me about it. I think this has been one of the most shared things we've had on Texas Signal. And I've noticed also a lot of affiliate groups sort of around the state that have read it. And I think he really raised some good points. He basically is sort of making the argument about investing in Texas and turning this state blue. And a lot of the points that he was talking about in terms of, maybe there was too much emphasis on television spending and particularly not enough with door-to-door efforts or meeting voters face-to-face. Of course, last year was very difficult with the pandemic that we're still in. However, I think we now know that there are ways we can interact with people safely. So that, yeah, I was very, very interested in what he had to say. What about you?
Yeah, I did, and I agree with those takeaways. I think the most important thing to me was that he focused on the future and not like, oh, well, this is everything we did wrong in 2020. I mean, he highlighted some of the things that you just mentioned, which has been a common takeaway as like, hey, we just weren't in front of people, and we didn't get a chance to address the lies and smears and have the conversations we needed to have. And so in 2018, he went to every single county, and that made a huge difference. And it was so great to see that. And, I think to some degree, it could preview, what he's thinking for the future himself. So we have a little bit of time. It is, March of 2021, which means that, we literally have right at a year until primary of Democratic primary.
And even then, that probably will get pushed back just because of redistricting, because we're not going to get that census data for several more months. But that is a whole other discussion.
Yeah, it is. That's a whole can of worms, but that's a good point. Yeah, to keep in mind that this is kind of a moving ball right now. We don't really know, but either way, if he ran, he's probably going to run statewide, and so he'll still have, it won't be a district; it'll be the whole shebang, and he'll have to do the 250 run again and 254, and hopefully, we have a full slate of candidates, because let's remember, like, we have a lot of statewide offices in the state of Texas, and they will all be up. Well, all the major ones will be up this coming cycle. So governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, attorney general We've had a couple of folks announced for these positions, and it's looking good with the couple of folks that have announced so far. Joe Jaworski, who I think you got to interview, right?
Yeah. I've talked with him, and he's sort of doing the Beto playbook. You know, he's more on the virtual side right now, but he's been talking with different groups, and I know that probably this summer he's going to pack up his stuff, and he'll be going to different places. And another thing that I really thought that Beto brought up that was really, really important was an emphasis on organizing and organizing early.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a talk with Jamie Harrison, who's the new president of the DNC, yesterday, and he is really, and he was talking about the ways in which the Democratic Party really has to organize early, get and start talking to people now and having those conversations. And that was something that Beto really brought up. So that is something that I hope we will see. A lot of the times, we'll get a lot of investment, but it'll come too late.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we get that early and we hire people in Texas too, I think that's important, that you just don't have people parachuting in who, they won't know any, they'll mispronounce Houston. They'll pronounce it like Houston Street,
Yeah.
So that I thought was something that was really, really important that he mentioned.
Yeah, and that's something that it's funny. Yeah, you bring up the Houston thing. Where people aren't from. I'm hoping to, with the series we're going to launch here pretty soon. What does it mean to be a Texas Democrat from fill in the blank? To kind of get that sort of different cultural and regional understanding of what it means to be a Democrat from these different places, because we're such a large state, and we really got to start defining who we are. As an individual state and regions within our state, because that's what it's going to take for us to win, having those conversations and even understanding what the difference between a Democrat from San Angelo and a Democrat from Beaumont in Jefferson County or Travis is completely different, from the Valley and West Texas. So so this is very interesting, and hopefully we'll see more of him. He is, of course, challenging Ken Paxton, who just can't stay out of trouble, or he certainly avoids accountability for the trouble that he causes or gets into. But again, he is suing Twitter, or at least he announced that he intended to, and then Twitter is suing him back, claiming essentially that they're being targeted by him for blocking the president. So basically, they're accusing him of retaliation. Very interesting. We know he was there as well on January 6th. So, not to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you've read any of these things, if you have any more insight, particularly on these two. But you mentioned some other thing he was recently in trouble for.
Yeah. So this ongoing case as well with the FBI has been investigating him for this relationship to a donor.
Mm-hmm.
And it is basically the case where, the Treasury Department, SEC, were investigating this donor and, raiding his offices, and then Paxton launched a counter investigation into the investigators. And so now it's also been discovered that there is another donor that was put on the payroll of Nate Paul, who's that initial donor, as a neighbor of his who's given $50,000. But basically, this is sort of Ken Paxton, where he has used this office in such a way that it is embarrassing. I mean, it's with this Twitter lawsuit. This reminds me of the Supreme Court challenge that he brought at the end of last year, which was probably one of the most embarrassing things that has ever occurred at the Supreme Court. I can imagine Sonia Sotomayor or Elena Kagan just, I'm offended that they even had to spend time thinking about that.
Yeah, it really institution, right?
This is his playbook, and he's using our tax dollars for this. He also, I know, sued the city of Austin, which was keeping in the mask mandate. I think they had found sort of a workaround through their health department, in a sense. But I mean, this is what he does. He is incredibly, he does not have the best interests of our state at heart. These are very petty grievances that he is trying to file. We also know that he, it took him 3 days before he sued the Biden administration
Right.
over immigration reform. He is leading the charge against DACA. He's leading the charge against the Affordable Care Act. I think both of those cases will hopefully nothing will actually come to fruition with those. But this is our Texas Attorney General.
Yeah.
He's a
Yeah.
constant embarrassment.
Constant. And you said, petty. It's just, I remember when the thing that we could all make fun of him for and say, look how petty this guy is. The crimes have escalated. He was first known, I think, to have stolen a pin from a courtroom, a Mont Blanc pin, and there was a video that sort of went viral of him. It was a security camera footage of him picking this pin up and walking away, but it turned out to be like $1,000 pin or something like that. And so those were the kind of petty crimes we used to be used to seeing from him. And now it's escalated to FBI, him, not only being investigated by the FBI, but part of what I read was the counter investigation you mentioned. The people he had his people looking into, and he's essentially trying to, I don't know if he was trying to dig up dirt or he was trying to, I don't know what his goal necessarily was, but they were FBI agents that he was like, I mean, he was no joke, really doing some kind of like Sopranos type, like gangster stuff. I mean, it's pretty wild. I mean, but that's what happens, I guess, if you don't get caught and you never are held accountable and you don't ever have to see your day in court, like Kim Paxton. So
Yes, our mob boss Attorney General.
yeah. And so, there's another person who's a little more politically ambiguous, I'll say, that has been considering a run. We don't know what he's thinking or what he stands for or anything, but Matthew McConaughey was trending when I woke up this morning because once again, the idea of Matthew McConaughey running for governor has come up. I don't know. What do you think about that?
So I have been deeply skeptical about this for a long time. However, the speculation for this occurred. He was on a podcast called The Balanced Voice. It is from the Houston Crime Stoppers. And so I actually watched the whole episode. And I have to say, I'm actually now thinking this actually very much could be a possibility. So in the episode, it's almost like a throwaway line where they're talking about leadership. He's talking about the mentorship that he does with a lot of children. He's also a professor right now at the University of Texas. So he's sort of talking about all these roles that he's sort of doing in this post-acting career. And it kind of hit me where I was like, you know what? I think this might be serious. So he did say that it was a consideration to run for governor. But also in this episode, he basically says that all the goals that he had prior to now, he has achieved those. So he is married, he has children, and he has an Academy Award. And those were the three things that he kind of set out to do, and he did them. So now we see him. He has been, a very vocal in terms of, sort of self-helpness. That's maybe not that I don't think he would ever use that word. He's very devoted to Texas. So he also said that he is hosting a virtual benefit for the to raise funds for people and communities impacted by the winter storm. So he said, be on the lookout on his Instagram page where he'll announce like the full list of performers and companies that would sponsor. But no, it really actually, I have to say, I am now maybe possibly thinking he really might be serious about this. Now, as you say, he does not really necessarily have a platform to run on, but he is a very famous Texan, probably one of our most famous right now. So maybe that's all the platform you need.
Yeah, I think it kind of reminds me of like when Willie Nelson endorsed Beto and all these like right-wing Republicans and stuff came out like saying they were going to burn all their Willie Nelson stuff because they had no idea that Willie Nelson was a liberal, like, because he is just kind of like this Texas icon. But I feel like you haven't been paying much attention and you weren't really a Willie Nelson fan if you didn't know that. But I mean, he endorsed Ann Richards. So like, I mean, he's always been liberal. But I kind of feel like that's what I'm waiting for because he can do all this big setup and do all this stuff, philanthropy, which is great. But at the end of the day, politics is politics, and he's going to have to take some positions, and he's going to have, you know.
One interesting thing. So he never actually said anything against Abbott about the winter storm response. He did mention that the infrastructure was solely lacking and the state was unprepared. However, he did actually talk about one person, and that was Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. So this podcast is on, I think, Houston Crime Stoppers. So, technically sort of about that type of stuff. But he mentioned about Art that he combines responsibility and compassion. And so this also goes into sort of like his idea of, what it means to be a leader. And again, if you're not sort of super familiar with the McConaughey aura right now, it will sound very strange because he'll go into like things about being like a good wolf and a bad wolf, and it won't necessarily make a lot of sense. But then once you start to think about it, you're like, okay, I'm maybe kind of understanding where he's coming from. So I did notice that, and that was also the part where that made me think like, okay, maybe he really is actually thinking about this.
Yeah, he's been sitting there with his wild turkey, taking sips and thinking about what it'd be like to live in the governor's mansion. I watch his Instagram stories, but yeah, I mean, I just feel like he's got, I'm surprised he was able to even escape the Eyes of Texas controversy, right? Because he is the Minister of Culture of the University of Texas, actual title they gave him, other than professor. And so I feel like if you're the Minister of Culture, this is like squarely on your plate to like say, yes, we should continue doing this. No, we don't, or there's a different context or something. But if you end up becoming a candidate, you can't get away with not saying anything about anything that's controversial because it hurts your brand. You just got to sort of pick a lane, and maybe he doesn't pick the left lane or the right lane. Maybe he tries to run as independent. The most successful independents we've seen run in Texas in recent history, at least mine, would be Kinky Friedman or Carol Strayhorn, Carol Keaton Rylander Strayhorn. So they got like 10% or something, in that range. And that was the year that Rick Perry won by the least amount, which was he won with 39%. Because with governor, you can win with a plurality. You don't necessarily need a majority. There's no runoff. So, that we could see a scenario where there's a Beto, a Matthew McConaughey, and a Governor Abbott, assuming Governor Abbott gets out of his primary, which I actually think that he will at this point. He's proven to be incredibly resilient, in my opinion, compared to how much he's actually screwed up everything. But I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to know, right? There's no information. I could see that kind of scenario shaking out. What I read on the Red State today, which is a conservative blog, but this piece was about Matthew McConaughey, and apparently this guy's inside source, whoever it might be, was a Democrat consultant who told them that the people that McConaughey is talking to right now are Democrat consultants or liberal consultants. So that was the only indication this person even had of what side of the aisle he would fall on. So, but I kind of think that like he can play the middle, but the moment he takes position, it's kind of all over from there. I think all the setup he's done to be careful and stay out of things, it's just going to all crumble and go away, because I think that's just the reality of politics today. And I remember him saying specifically in a previous interview a few months ago, they asked him, would you consider running for governor? And he said, I definitely something I would think about, but politics is basically, he said, the system is broken, and I'd rather wait till it wasn't so broken. But to me, like, that's the point of real leaders, like what Beto's trying to do is like, no, it's our job to fix the brokenness, not wait for people to fix it and then say, oh, now's a great time to get into politics because everything's like right and I could just take it home and whatever. And I don't think that's what he meant, but I just think that like it's going to be a huge learning curve for him when he's like, wait a minute, I'm doing everything right. I'm trying to bring people together, and people are just slapping him in the face with criticism about everything. So whatever. Sorry for that rant, but I just this is gonna be interesting. I'm not even opposed to it. I just
it'll keep us guessing for over a year now, I think.
If nothing else, it will absolutely do that. Yeah, it'll be something interesting to watch. I mean, it's not like we have the deepest bench in the world. So I mean, Matthew McConaughey can bring star power to the Democratic Party and is interested in not, in that, then I wouldn't oppose that. I mean, we have an open system; people can run. So yeah, well, we'll see what happens there. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of I'm kind of exhausted from that. I don't know what else to say.
It is really fun. I think if you had told me like 15 or like 20, go back a time machine, like you're watching like The Wedding Planner or something, and then you're like, you know what, Matthew McConaughey very much might run for governor of Texas. You would. There's probably a lot of things like if you went in a time machine 20 years ago and said what had happened, you'd probably be like, oh my god. But
You can't blame him. He's done everything. I mean, he's done rom-coms. He's done like, I mean, Dazed and Confused was like his really kind of first breakout, right? I mean, so he's
he
done.
spent a year in Australia. If you read his book, that was a very
Oh,
formative thing for him when he was like 18 years old, and
oh wow.
that
That raised him to play
sent
the
him on it. Australia plays a big part in his life. Like he was, I think, filming a movie with Kate Hudson in Australia again, and that's I think the moment when he was like, I can't do these romantic comedies anymore, and it sent him on a new journey to
when
say.
he started doing the detective. I actually never saw that show, True Detective, but
The first season's really good.
okay, that was the one he was in, right?
Hmm.
I just remember everybody telling me there was a scene from Beaumont, and that's where I'm from. So I was like, oh, I probably should go back and watch that. But anyway, yeah, he's kind of played every role, so I feel like I guess maybe he thinks this is a role he can play. Fine. Yeah. So what are we looking at coming up? Is there anything on your mind, interesting topics that you covered or?
I think that we're keeping an eye on the legislature. There have been some really kind of odious bills that have been filed, on the voter suppression side, anti-choice side. I was very the representative who filed the heartbeat bill was one of the biggest had the biggest celebration about the mask mandate repeal. So I was very tickled by that pro-life stance.
Right.
So on my other podcast, on the Text Mix, I did have a chat with Texas Equal Access Fund and Lilith Fund, two people from those organizations are talking about the state of access of abortion in Texas. So that's always something to monitor. I think we briefly touched on, the eyes of Texas. There's been a lot of really gross anti-trans bills that have been filed sort of in the name of women's sports, even though they have nothing to do with women's sports. I guarantee you, in fact, like the people that are most in favor of that bill, I don't even think they can name 5 female athletes. But so that's sort of the
No,
stuff that I've been
yeah,
monitoring.
absolutely no question. And I think you have brought this up before. I think it was you who said they probably didn't support Title IX, funding anyway. Like this has nothing to do with women's sports. And as a matter of fact, like the most annoying thing about this to me is that the law that they're talking about, which is essentially they don't want trans athletes to compete in women's sports, is sort of the way the bill is it's talked about and pushed. But it's about, of course, the gender expression of an individual. But the way the law is written, from what I remember, and the reason that a trans woman had to compete, or I guess in this case, trans men will have to compete in women's sports, is because the way the law is written currently, that forces them to participate in the sport that aligns with the gender that's on their birth certificate. And so if you like, it was a wrestler, and I think they're from North Texas, and it was a trans man, and he was having to wrestle women. He was like, I actually don't want to wrestle women, I want to wrestle men, but the way the law is in the state of Texas, I cannot compete in men's sports.
Yeah,
So
it's very cruel.
yeah, it's absolutely just about being cruel, and has nothing to do, and these are kids, and that's the worst part about it, is like they're literally targeting kids because they don't care. So yeah, that's awful.
On a more positive note, because I know we wanted to have a positive sort of way. I know we talked about vaccinations, and Texas really lagging behind. However, this is actually where the federal government makes a huge impact. So we do know that the Biden administration set this goal of 100 million shots, 100 days. They beat that in 50 days. We know that Texas is in line to get, I think it was 1 million vaccinations this week, and including that Johnson and Johnson shot, which is just one and done. So I really think that they had these sort of estimates of when quote unquote herd immunity might be achieved in Texas, and they just keep moving up that date because of the vaccination rollout. So that is, I think, one sort of silver lining there.
That is, and I appreciate that, because you know what, I could really think of much that was really positive that happened this week, particularly. Other than to see sort of that op-ed from Beto and think about what we could be doing. But yeah, I encourage folks to go check out the relief bill that was just passed by Congress, because there's a lot in there for Texas, and not a single Republican voted for it. So of course we know that no Texas Republican voted for it. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. It's going to really help a lot of people, and know that the only reason that happened is because Democrats are in office, and we can do so much more to make sure that we get that same kind of benefit from our state government, which we deserve. So with that, I think it's a good time to wrap it up and say goodbye, and thanks again to our patrons who helped make this happen, and to everyone else who listens. Thank you. And please consider joining us, and find us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and just join the conversation. We love it. Tell us what you like, what you don't, what we're missing here. But until then.
Bye, guys.